Day 153 to 5:11 p.m. Madrigelos National High School, Barangay Madrigelos, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. It had almost been an hour since their leader entered the waiting room. The soldiers around were becoming a little impatient. Since the waiting room was initially a classroom, the soldiers could see what was happening inside. They could see that their leader was talking to the group. Strangely, though, the soldiers waiting could not hear anything at all from the conversation. It was even though the room was small and average speaking voices should reach outside. It was one of the reasons why the soldiers were becoming impatient. The only time they heard Officer Emilio's voice was when he drove the younger soldiers away from peeking through the window. The young buggers had been peeking and staring at the beautiful woman in the group. It was clear that it was inappropriate. That was why the younger soldiers were now waiting further away. As for the older soldiers, they were more concerned about the situation than paying attention to appearances. If something dangerous were to happen inside, they would bust in guns up front. But by what it looked like, that would not happen. From the window, they saw Officer Emilio stand up from his seat. He then walked toward the exit. The group also followed behind him. The soldiers outside the room surrounded their leader. "Sir." An older but lower-ranked soldier spoke. "They are?" "We will talk about this later," Officer Emilio replied. "Arrange for another meeting an hour later. This meeting will be important. I'll meet you all there." "What about you, sir?" the soldier asked. "I'll personally guide our guests to where they will be staying. They are important guests. Make sure that everyone is informed not to cause them trouble." Sure enough, the soldiers were taken aback at their leader's words. First was Dr. Janice. Now, it was Officer Emilio that was behaving oddly. Without a doubt, something was strange about this group that they led into this place. However, they could not just ignore the words of their leader. As such, they followed Officer Emilio's orders, leaving a few trusted soldiers as his guards. "Let's go." Officer Emilio turned to Mark. "I'll bring you where your group can stay." Mark nodded without a word. He led his group to follow the military officer while was observing the surroundings. After all, he was not able to properly assess the place when they entered. As Mark looked around, he could not help but shake his head. The whole place was a mess. Well, not in a literal sense. The school was a mix and match of both good and bad things to live in during a zombie apocalypse. The school was a large one in terms of land space. It was more than enough to house several hundred people. However, it was too large than necessary for the people currently living here. It was likely that the soldiers were struggling to monitor the perimeter around the school. Aside from the school occupying a wide area, its walls were nowhere enough to defend against a large-scale infected attack. There were even parts of the walls that were already destroyed. The destroyed parts were blocked with barricades that were also questionable if they could last against another attack. The rooms of the school were also too close to the walls in the back areas. It caused the rooms there to be unusable and was left vacant. After all, it would be too dangerous to live there. Instead, the residents built makeshift houses in the middle of the school grounds. They might look shabby, but in the least, it was safer than living side by side with danger. What made Mark commend the people was that they cared about the weak, old, women, and children. Most of the men in this place seemed to have taken the makeshift houses while the usable classrooms were designated to the weaker people. Especially the injured, they were left to recuperate in the most comfortable places. Mark might not care too much about these things about strangers, however, it was still nice to see these gestures from time to time. Nonetheless, these things might not last too long. In the current state of the people in this place, they would soon experience breakdowns. Monitoring the mental and emotional fluctuations of the people in the surroundings, many of them were on the verge of giving up. They had lost their settlement in a very helpless manner, along with their loved ones. In an event where the whole place was swallowed by a raging tidal wave when no one was prepared, surviving with your entire family was like winning a million-peso lottery. After losing their loved ones, they had to experience a dangerous march north in hopes of reaching the closest settlement. Now, they were stuck in this place with limited supplies and living in a dangerous environment. It was not surprising if the people already began to riot a long time ago. While following Officer Emilio, he was gladly being greeted by the residents along the way while having curious glances at Mark's group. Some even bravely inquired about their guests. However, the military officer tried his best not to linger on the topic too much. There was no doubt. Despite claiming to be allies, Mark's group was still a dangerous bunch. It would not be good if they were accidentally offended by the residents. Looking at how the residents interacted with Officer Emilio, Mark understood why this place had not collapsed yet. There was a single soldier that kept the place intact with his honesty and virtue. It was hard to see people with this quality. Officer Emilio aside, Mark's group was definitely gathering attention. Being the first new people they saw for a long time was more than enough for the residents to feel curious. However, Mark's group also had a beautiful woman with them. In fact, a lot of the residents were young males. Some of them were among the people that greeted Officer Emilio and inquired about the group. Their goals were more than obvious. There were even some idiots who were insistent on introducing themselves to the group, and Officer Emilio and the soldiers were having a hard time making up excuses. Of course, Mark was also getting annoyed. These bastards were targeting his wife. May was also getting uncomfortable. She could not help but grab Mark's arm. That gesture of May, however, made the men's attention shift to Mark in annoyance. And, of course, Mark would not just ignore those stares. A heavy feeling enveloped the place. It felt like everyone was being eyed by a ferocious beast. Everyone in the surroundings felt uncomfortable. The idiots were even sweating bullets. Still, no one realized what was happening. The only thing that entered their minds was to leave the place. Seeing the people in the surroundings leave, Officer Emilio's back was filled dripping with cold sweat. As a mutator, he was more sensitive towards his surroundings. He could feel that the heavy feeling was coming from behind him. The soldiers around them were also confused as to what had just happened. It was extremely odd. Finally, the pests left. "Can we get going already?" Mark's voice entered the ears of the soldiers around him. It confirmed Officer Emilio's hunch about what happened. He could not help but gulp his saliva. "Let's go." Officer Emilio forced a smile as he continued to lead the group. Asterisk asterisk. Really? That man is a monster. On the second floor of a school building a distance away, Dr. Janice was watching the event unfold. The existence of Mark's group sure instilled fear in her. However, it also made her curious. How come such beings exist? She wanted to know. Nonetheless, she was not someone suicidal to just go and ask. She needed to know their personality first before trying to inquire about her curiosities. She already experienced being on the verge of death twice. She did not want to repeat that again. Well, shit. Dr. Janice blurted out a swear. She just saw Mark turn his head towards her. It seemed that she was not the only one curious. The opposite party was the same. "I just hope this will end well for me." The doctor could only let out a sigh as she watched Mark's group follow Officer Emilio. She caught the eyes of the devil. That was what she felt. Asterisk asterisk. "This will be the place." Officer Emilio spoke, stopping in front of the classroom at the southwestmost area of the school. "It is not the best, but at least it is spacious enough for your group." Mark looked at the classroom, then at the surroundings. "The classroom furthest from everyone, huh?" Mark said, making Officer Emilio smile bitterly. The military officer's intention was clear. He wanted to make the residents stay clear of Mark's group. "Well, it's good." Mark nodded. "I also don't want to stay around ants who don't know their place." Mark's voice was filled with contempt. This made the faces of the soldiers change. The ants that Mark mentioned were still their people. It could not be helped if they wanted to argue with him. However, before they could even let out a voice, they felt Officer Emilio's gaze. Then, the officer slightly shook his head. This gesture was more than enough to tell them to stop. Mark just glanced at the soldiers as he entered the classroom with the others. "It needs cleaning," Mark said, wiping the layer of dust on the teacher's table with his index finger. "Sorry about this." It's been a while since the last time we used these rooms. Officer Emilio spoke. Should I call someone to clean? No need, Mark replied as he glanced at his backpack. Emihan, you can come out, now. And there, with shocked faces, the soldiers saw a small winged girl fly out of Mark's bag. There was no way they would not feel shocked about this. Master, do we need to always do this? I didn't have to hide back in Infanta. Emihan complained. The bag is too stuffy. The bag Mark had on his back had metal bracings inside. It kept the bag in shape despite not having a lot of things inside. It also kept Emihan from being suffocated inside the bag. Still, hiding inside an enclosed space was not something comfortable. Not all places are safe. We can at least have you as backup, right? Mark replied to Emihan, making her shrug. Yes, sir, that is. Officer Emilio could barely keep his calm. One of our companions, Mark replied. Is there a problem? No, there's none. Officer Emilio answered Mark's question while his eyes were glued to the fairy-like creature beside Mark. Ignoring the stupefied soldiers, Mark turned to Emihan. Can you gather all the dust in the room in one place? No problem. Emihan replied as she began to manipulate the wind inside the classroom. The wind started to blow in one direction, sucking all the dust in the room into one place. The soldiers watched the spectacle in both amazement and shock. Magic. Real magic. A female soldier let out her excited voice. Despite being a soldier, she was still a maiden that grew up with fairy tales. She seemed really excited to see true magic for the first time in her life. Private Monteroso. Please pipe down. Officer Emilio warned as the female soldier's voice was getting loud. Mark then turned to the group of soldiers by the door. Don't you guys have to attend a meeting? We can take care of ourselves. We also haven't eaten lunch yet. It will be uncomfortable to have you all watching while we eat. Being chased away in their own turf felt awkward and strange for the soldiers. However, because of the surprise from Amihan's appearance, none of them were in the state to argue back. Besides, they had other things to do than babysit people. Then, I'll leave a soldier to stand guard. Just let them know if you need something. Officer Emilio said as he picked a soldier to stay behind with Mark's group. Without surprise, the excited female soldier was the one to volunteer. Mark had no problems with the arrangement. It was also better to have someone to relay messages if necessary. Now that their dwelling was secured, Mark only had to wait. First was the information that Officer Emilio would provide. The second was the result of Ignis and Crimson doing some reconnaissance work on the town occupied by the Tamawo. Mark expected to receive the reports before night time, and after the sun had set down the horizon, he would also do his work. Day 153 to 6:01 p.m. Principal's Office, Martagellos National High School, Barangay Madrigellos, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. Like what Officer Emilio wanted to do, he and the other leading individuals in this place gathered in a meeting. It was not just the high-ranking soldiers who were present. There were also other people like Dr. Janice and some able-bodied people from the residence. Sir Emilio, why are we called here suddenly? My group just returned from the coast. A well-built man asked. He was not a soldier from his appearance, and he had the aura of a man of the sea, a fisherman. His name was Caudillo Alcozba, a mutator and the person in charge of leading a group to find food near the coast. It is about the group that arrived, I presume. Dr. Janice spoke. A group? Survivors? How many? Caudillo asked as he was not present when the group in question arrived. 8 people. 4 little girls, 2 men, and 2 women. I saw them when Officer Emilio guided them to where they would stay. A lean-bodied young man replied to the fisherman's question. He had a pretty handsome face, and accompanied by his lean stature, he looked like an actor. This man's name was Denver Briones, an aspiring actor before the outbreak. He was not able to reach his dream, though, since the world had gone chaotic. But damn, that woman's beautiful. Denver continued. Is she some international star or something? You better not target them with your shenanigans toward women, Denver. Dr. Janice interjected as she glared at the womanizer in front of her. If you dare mess with her, we won't care what will happen to you. Oh, shut up, Janice, Denver argued. I'm a playboy, I admit. But I also have my virtues. I don't put my hands on women who are obviously taken. Besides, I'm not stupid. That man leading them had strange powers. He drove the flies around them away without even uttering a single word. Denver's last sentence took the attention of everyone in the room. Some of them looked skeptical. Murmurs began as they started to speculate. Don't look at with those eyes. Denver frowned. Officer Emilio is there. Why don't you all ask him? Finally, everyone's attention was back on the leader, who was standing there silently waiting for them to stop their talk. You all done? Officer Emilio asked. Everyone fell silent while some let out coughs in embarrassment. Since everyone was ready to start, Officer Emilio began to speak. We will talk about what Denver saw earlier, but the unexpected guests really are the center of this meeting. Sir Emilio, did you learn about who they are? Another military officer asked. His name was First Lieutenant Gerard Ka ± Eat. He was pretty much the right hand of Officer Emilio in running this group. We only had a brief introduction, but from what they said, it seemed that they had direct connections to the higher people in the military. And when I said higher, they were two military generals from settlements in Luzon. Officer Emilio explained. That, however, made the soldiers in the room surprised. Sir, you are not kidding, right? Gerard asked. I might believe it if you mentioned General Aguilar that should be leading the Bantayan settlement or the late General Epifanio that led us. But generals from military settlements in Luzon? Did they magically fly here? I might think of the same if it only came from their mouths. Officer Emilio shook his head. But their leader gave me a proper identification document signed by General Faustino of Infanta Settlement and was even stamped with the confidential military seal. I can't see any way to fake that seal. I'm sure you are the same. I had heard about that seal, but I haven't seen it, Gerard replied. Is it really the seal? Yes, there is no doubt. Officer Emilio nodded. The seal is not fake. With Officer Emilio's confirmation, the room became noisy once again. It was not surprising that they had this reaction since the conversation earlier basically said that their guests actually came from Luzon. They traveled over the dangerous seas during this outbreak. With how dangerous the sea is it really possible? The fisherman, Cadilio, asked. He knew how dangerous the sea waters now more than anyone here in this room. It might be hard for us, but probably not them. Officer Emilio answered. Dr. Janice might be able to support this claim of mine. That's probably the case. Dr. Janice agreed. They might just be 8 people, but except for 2 people, the others were powerful. Wait. The playboy, Denver, interjected. There are 4 children with them. Why are there only 2 weak ones? What are you talking about? Dr. Janice frowned. The weaker ones are the 2 teens. Those little girls you are looking down on might be stronger than you. Everyone was taken aback at the doctor's words. You're joking, right? Denver said awkwardly. Do I look like joking to you? Dr. Janice argued. You all here knew my ability. I won't say anything like that without basis. The whole room fell silent. On the topic of measuring an evolver or mutator's ability, none of the people here would be reliable besides Dr. Janice. Dr. Janice's ability as a mutator might be useless in direct combat. However, it was an extremely reliable ability not only to detect mutators, evolvers, and the infected. Her ability could also determine the weakness of an infected, allowing the fighters to end the threat sooner. When Dr. Janice activates her ability, she was able to see the concentration of mutagen in the surroundings. It included animals, plants, people, and even some non-living things. She could see mutagen as glowing dust of different colors with her eyes. In her eyes, mutagen follows a certain pattern inside a subject's body. When she gazed towards an infected, she would see their bodies filled with clumped-up gray-colored dust. These clumps of dust were erratically moving inside the bodies of the infected. These erratic and random movements differentiated the infected from non-infected creatures, evolvers and mutators. Unlike the infected, evolvers had a tamer movement of mutagen in their bodies. The concentration of mutagen would be focused on their enhanced body parts. People with faster running speed would have more mutagen in their legs, while heavy punchers would have more in their arms. Unlike the infected with gray-colored erratic moving mutagen, the mutagen inside an evolver's body flowed like blood inside their veins and was flesh-colored. When an evolver activated their abilities, the mutagen would flow faster. Mutators, on the other hand, had a thicker concentration of mutagen in their mutated body parts. It allowed Dr. Janus to speculate the mutator's ability before even knowing it. Depending on the mutator and mutation, the mutagen's pattern in their bodies would be different. A good example was when Dr. Janus looked at Officer Emilio with her ability. The mutagen inside the officer's body was concentrated on his skin and had a brownish color. Furthermore, instead of a fluid-like movement, the mutagen on his skin moved slowly. Once Officer Emilio activated his ability, the mutagen would stick together and clump up all over his skin. It was a fascinating sight watching the mutagen forming what seemed to be a solid wall. Last were non-infected beings. Everyone had mutagen inside their bodies, and non-infected humans were an example. Non-infected creatures had a sparse amount of mutagen in their bodies. Furthermore, they moved like colloids in the air, random but not erratic. It seemed to be in something like a dormant state, as there was also no glow coming from mutagen in non-infected individuals. The ability that Dr. Janus had was an interesting and helpful one. However, her ability also allowed her to see that the mutators and evolvers were not exactly perfect. If she was to ask as to how to describe it, it was like transplanting an organ to another person. The transplant might be successful, but rejection could appear and affect the patient. Mutagen was the same. From what she saw, although the mutagen formed patterns inside a person's body, it was never perfect. Putting Officer Emilio as an example once more, the mutagen concentrated on his skin moved slowly as if it experiencing some friction. Furthermore, when a particle collided with each other, both would be thrown in different directions, stopping the pattern temporarily. It was the same with others and was bound to happen from time to time. In fact, Dr. Janus had never seen anyone that had mutagen flowing smoothly inside their bodies that it created a perfect pattern. Well, she never saw one until today. It was when she saw the leader of the group that arrived earlier, Mark. Dr. Janus saw that inside Mark's body, there were 4 concentrations of mutagen. So far, Dr. Janus only saw people with 2 different kinds of mutagen concentration inside their bodies. After all, there were people that were evolvers first before becoming mutators. When they became mutators, their abilities as evolvers never disappeared, making them stronger than mutators, who were just regular humans before getting bitten. Mark, however, had 1 concentration of an evolver ability and 3 concentrations of mutagen, indicating 3 mutator abilities. It was extremely shocking for her. The evolver concentration on Mark's body was on his flesh, all over his body. Dr. Janus could not exactly guess what it was, since it could be an enhancing ability or it could also be a regenerative one. Strangely, however, was how active the mutagen in his flesh. Although they did not have a bright glow as a mutator's concentration, the glowing dust was rapidly flowing inside the fibers of Mark's flesh. On the other hand, the 3 mutator abilities were distributed differently. One was on his blood, while the other was on his bones. The last one was strange, as it was actually all over his whole body. What allowed Dr. Janus to differentiate the 4 concentrations was their color. The mutagen in his blood was colored reddish-black. On his bones, it was also reddish-black but had a brighter color of red. On the other hand, the last concentration strangely had no color. Furthermore, the last concentration gave the doctor a feeling that it was ready to accept other colors anytime but would not change into it. Instead, it would make the color it absorbed transparent too. It was strange. The strangest thing, however, was all those 4 mutagen concentrations did not display any sign of collision and were in perfect harmony. And to say, it looked beautiful as the patterns flowed naturally without any disturbance. As for the beautiful girl and the children, they were different from Mark. The patterns in their bodies had some interruptions. Nonetheless, she could not ignore the fact that the beautiful girl not only had an evolver concentration but also two mutator concentrations in her body. The two girls, the green-haired one and the second youngest girl, were definitely mutators. However, their mutagen concentration was too thick that it made any mutator in this school pale in comparison. Next was the second oldest girl. Unexpectedly, she was just an evolver. However, the concentration on mutagen in her body was even more than a regular mutator, making it safe to treat her like one. Furthermore, she shared the same pattern as the evolver concentration on their leader. It was as if she inherited it from him. Lastly, among the four girls, the youngest was the strangest. Mutator? It was possible, but Dr. Janice could not properly tell. Why? It was because the mutagen concentration on her body was the thickest among the group. Her whole body was covered with mutagen. She might as well become an embodiment of mutagen at this point. Unfortunately, there was no way for Dr. Janice to tell without asking directly. Dr. Janice explained some points of her observation, leaving unconfirmed details behind. As she told everyone that Mark alone might be able to kill everyone in this place, they felt stifled. There was no way that she would joke about this. You all hear me, right? Dr. Janice continued. Do not provoke them if you all wanted to continue living. You all heard her. Officer Emilio supported the doctor. Besides, their group could also be our ticket to continue on our journey to Bantayan. Our ticket? Denver asked the question that was in the mind of everyone inside this room. Apparently, their goal here was that town that blocked us from continuing on. Those Tamawo bastards that occupied the town and blocked the road. Officer Emilio explained. Hearing that, everyone's expression changed. If they were really their ticket out of this place, they would be glad not to offend them in the slightest. Day 153 to 6:12 p.m. Principal's Office, Madrigelos National High School, Barangay Madrigelos, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. The meeting continued after Dr. Janice briefly explained her findings and Officer Emilio summarizing the crucial points of his conversation with Mark. Nonetheless, it all boiled down to one single question. Can we trust them? The fisherman, Caudillo, asked. Even though Dr. Janice said that they were a powerful group, even if their goal was to deal with the Tamawas, as Officer Emilio mentioned, there was still the issue of trust. And Officer Emilio's answer, of course, was, I can't say for sure that we can trust them. Officer Emilio shook his head. It made everyone sigh but also relieved. Officer Emilio was a cautious leader. He would not just trust anyone they met shortly. He was not careless towards himself or his people. Nonetheless, Officer Emilio continued with an argument that none of them would be able to deny. I don't know if we can trust them, but they're our only chance of getting past that accursed town, and maybe save the people enslaved there along the way. Everyone fell silent in a disheartening way. After their settlement in Loloan suddenly fell because of that monster, leaving less than 10% surviving the tidal wave, everyone could barely cling onto any hope that was left. They manually carried all the supplies they could find. They even put the injured into ragged carts and carried some on their backs. They used what was left of their strength to travel north. Using vehicles before the outbreak, the distance between Loloan and Madrigelos would only take a little bit more than an hour to traverse. But for the survivors of Loloan's settlement after its collapse, it took them more than 2 weeks. They could not travel continuously because of the injured and their limited supplies. The survivors had to stop and find shelter at different intervals to have rest and replenish their supplies. It was hard to maintain enough water and food for several hundred people, especially with most of them injured because of the settlement's destruction. And the attacks they received from both infected and evolved animals in their journey made everything worse. After those hardships, they reached this place. It was barely halfway their estimated route north, but no one expected that the road would be blocked by some hostile creatures from the urban legends. The group tried to reason that they would only want to pass by, only to have spears pointed at them. Luckily, Those Tamawas were also afraid of the soldiers' guns and did not provoke any kind of battle. Nonetheless, the survivors were not allowed to pass through and were driven away. It had been about a month since that happened. Since then, the survivors were stuck in this place. They had no choice but to find an opportunity to pass through that town occupied by the Tamawo. Fighting their way through. It was easier said than done. They observed the Tamawas stealthily using various methods. They learned that the Tamawas enslaved the people that lived in the town. They also used their legendary charm ability to beguile the women to become their partners. The worst part was that the useless people were actually turned into food for these vicious creatures. Learning about what happened to the residents, the soldiers and the survivors were angry. However, they were also helpless about the situation. The survivors in this place were in the worst situation. There was also no way for them to go on a different route. From this school, instead of going north, they could take a detour eastward. However, it was far more dangerous than staying stuck in this place. Although it was a paved road, the route east would go through the mountainous center of the province. It would be expected for them to encounter evolved animals on a regular basis. Furthermore, safer places where they could stay would be far distant from each other. It would be likely that they would need to camp out every now and then. That would be the worst thing to do in the middle of the mountains during this apocalypse. Not to mention that going east would bring them closer to the territory of the infected. Having too many people traveling near the infected territory would definitely draw the infected to their group. That was why they were here, stuck. Now, Mark's group appeared. Trustworthy or not, that strange group was their only hope in their hopeless situation. Even if they are powerful, will they be able to succeed against those human-shaped monsters? Denver asked. We can't say for sure. Officer Emilio replied with a sigh. Even so, we will have nothing to lose in supporting them. We all know that, sooner or later, we will have to take even more dangerous measures to survive. Our supplies won't last forever either. This might be our last chance. The meeting continued on with this decision. And even though Mark's group said that they only needed information, Officer Emilio and the others decided that they would prepare as a backup in case something unexpected happened. Asterisk 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 unknown to them all, just outside the window of the principal's office, Mark was listening to their meeting. They're pretty decent, aren't they? Mark nodded in commendation. The leaders of this group were pretty decent ones, although one seemed to have some hateful quirks. I might want to take some of them in, especially that doctor. She had such an interesting ability. To think that she could see mutagen forming patterns. Her ability is useful for studying mutagen. It's a pity, though. She seemed to be unable to see psipathogen. Probably because it's an entirely different pathogen despite coming from the same root. But then, Mark shook his head. I'll just let nature take its course. Recruiting people with concrete goals will be hard unless there was a good opportunity. It was like with Barak, Geronimo, and Padua. The three joined his group due to circumstances around them. It would not have happened if there were no good opportunities at that time. I don't need anything else from this meeting. I better go back. Crimson and Ignis are about to return. With those words to himself, Mark turned into a surge of black mist. The black mist then flew across the window in the darkness of the night. Asterisk asterisk. Huh. Bang. Suddenly, Dr. Janice stood up from in the middle of their meeting. Her chair even fell, causing a loud bang on the floor. Everyone fell silent and looked at her only to see her rubbing her eyes while staring at the window. What happened? Officer Emilio asked the doctor. I thought I saw something outside the window, Dr. Janice said as she picked up her chair. I must be seeing things. Someone went out to check, however, they saw nothing. Then, let's get back to the topic, Officer Emilio said as they continued after the slight intervention. However, Dr. Janice was silent, still staring at the window. What in the world is that? Dr. Janice thought. Mutagen? No, it looks too different. Of course, Dr. Janice was out of her wits. Although she said that she might just be seeing things, she was sure that she saw something. She saw a mist emitting bright light that flew past the window. And rather than a pattern, it was more like it was emitting waves of bright light. It was strange, as it was the first time Dr. Janice saw something like that. Asterisk asterisk. Huh. Did she saw me? Mark said as he appeared on the roof of the building. He could feel that Dr. Janice seemed to be shocked. It doesn't matter, I guess. I'm not invisible when turning into mist, after all. And there, Mark vanished once more, finally returning to the room that Officer Emilio brought them to. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. In the middle of the forest northeast of Madrigellos, a shadow was traveling from tree to tree. The shadow then landed near a strange group of trees that seemed to encircle a wide patch of clear land. Moonlight shone on the man's body as he walked into the open. With a spear in his right hand, it was a handsome man with white skin, pointed ears, and tribal tattoos on his body. It was Pephile. Pephile stopped for a bit but then proceeded to step forwards with his left hand stretched in front of him. Suddenly, his hand touched something invisible. As he touched it, it caused water-like ripples in the air. And there, he walked through the ripple, making the scenery change. The clearing turned into a small village with houses made of misshapen trees and fauna. It had been a long time I've been in this place, Pephile murmured as he observed the surroundings. Barely anything changed. Village of the Exiles. That was what this place was called. As the name stated, it was where the exiled go. To be specific, the exiled Tamawas of his tribe. Unlike their tribe's homeland concealed into a pocket of space, the village was only hidden using an illusory barrier. Furthermore, it was a barrier that would make mortals stifled and stay away. As Pephile entered the barrier, the villagers immediately noticed his presence. The ripples on the barrier spread out across the entire village. It was a defense mechanism that would allow everyone to react to intruders and danger. Tamawas went out of their houses. There were also human females present hiding inside their homes. With spears on their hands, they were ready to confront the intruder. But then, they saw a Tamawo standing at the border of the village. It was the intruder. "Who are you? How did you find our village?" A young Tamawo leading in front of the group bellowed at the intruder. Along with the question, the group of young Tamawas was ready to attack if the intruder made any threatening movement. Unexpectedly, the question was ignored. The intruder did not pay attention to the young Tamawas at all. Instead, he was looking around nonchalantly. The young Tamawo could not accept that and led the attack. The other young Tamawas also charged towards the intruder. What the young Tamawas did not realize was that their fathers and the other older Tamawas were staring at the intruder in shock. It was already late when they noticed that the younger ones began attacking. The older Tamawas wanted to stop the young ones, but they saw the intruder glance at them with a slight shake of his head. Bang! Bang! Within a few seconds, the group of young Tamawas, composed of 30 individuals, was lying down on the ground with shocked faces. "These young ones lacked discipline, don't they, Aril?" An intruder spoke, mentioning a name that everyone in this village knew. "You don't have to be that harsh, Pephile." An old Tamawo stepped forward from the crowd. This Tamawo was too old that the handsome features of their race already wrinkled with time. Everyone heard Aril, the chief of this village, call the intruder's name. All of them, even the young Tamawas, were shocked. Despite the pain after being beaten, the young Tamawas forced themselves up. Pephile stood there with a frown as he watched everyone kneel in front of him. "We greet our rightful king," everyone bellowed in unison with Aril leading them. "Aril," Pephile glared at the village chief. "I am not your king. I am nothing but a wanderer. No matter what you say, you are the only king in our hearts. Not your brother that forced himself into the throne of our tribe." Aril cried out. It was not only the chief, the other older Tamawas were looking at Pephile filled with reverence. "That is all in the past," Pephile argued. "I'm here for a different matter." "It is for the queen, I presume?" Aril asked. "She's not your queen. She's just a regular human." Pephile frowned. Mortal or not, she had the king's marking. The king's other half. Aril stood strong in his belief. "I don't care about what you think," Pephile grumbled. How is she? And to Paphile's question, Eril looked down. Because of the king's marking, not a strand of her hair was harmed. However, I can't say that she's doing good. Those words made Paphile grasp his spear tightly. What happened? Day 153 to 8:16 p.m. Village of Exiles, Barangay Mardragelos, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. Shouldn't we talk about this somewhere no one could hear? Eril replied to Paphile's question while glancing at the surroundings. Paphile could not help but loosen his tight grip on his spear. He was pretty agitated at the topic of his abducted wife that he forgot that this was not the right place to talk about private matters. Lead the way. Paphile replied to the old Tamawo. Eril then turned to the people around them. All of you return to what you are doing. Don't be a bother to our king. Yes. The people replied, respectfully bowing to Paphile and Eril before they left. How many times should I need to tell you that I am not your king? Paphile frowned. Unfortunately. Eril smiled. No matter what you say, it is not something you will be able to change. Paphile fell silent. He had already grown tired of refuting the old man in front of him. Following Eril, Paphile was brought into the largest house at the center of the village. It was a house built under the roots of a giant tree. Most of the furniture was made using smaller roots and was even embedded on the walls. It was a living house. Paphile entered the house without hesitation. He had entered this place a lot of times than he could remember. The last time, however, was already more than a decade ago. It was at the time that his wife was abducted by his brother. It was also when Paphile was forced to escape this place, unable to save his poor wife. Please, take a seat. Eril said, preparing a hot drink using some leaves unknown to humans. The leaves emitted a sweet fragrance and had a slight fluctuation of magical energy. It was a magical herbal tea. A cup made of wood was placed in front of Paphile as he took the seat. He did not hesitate to take the cup and drank a bit of the tea. Can you tell me what happened already? Paphile asked as he put down the cup. To tell the truth, no one knows what exactly happened to her, Eril replied after taking the seat in front of Paphile. From the message my son sent us, it seemed that her health is deteriorating. How is that possible? Paphile was agitated. My brother, Artile, fell in love with her. There's no way that he would let this happen. It is true that there was no way that he would let this happen. Eril agreed. He even used precious herbs to improve her health as much as possible. However, none of it worked properly. She would get better because of the herbs, but it would get worse after a while. From the last message that my son sent, it seemed that her condition was getting worse, that she was unable to get up from her bed anymore. This. Did I take too long? Paphile murmured, looking down at the table. No, I'll make sure that I will take her back this time. My king. That would be dangerous. Eril warned. Back then, you weren't able to take her and had to escape. You almost died. Now, the young ones had grown. There would be more of them to stop and capture you, forcing you into a disadvantageous duel with your brother. If you fell into their hands now, there would be no escape anymore. That might happen, Paphile said. Eril looked at his respected king. He believed that he would be disheartened by the truth. But the old Tamawo was surprised. Paphile actually looked calm. Right. I might get caught if I went there. Paphile raised his head. That's if it was the same as the past. Now, I have measures to take. And this time, I'm not alone. This made Eril surprised. Just what gave Paphile the confidence this time? However, if Paphile did succeed this time, there would be a great change within the tribes soon. Several hundred years ago, it far before the people of the West colonized the country. A tribe of beautiful men already existed. They were magical beings, spirits of nature and water that gained physical bodies due to the blessing of a goddess. In return for the blessing they received, they guarded the sacred bodies of water, keeping them clean and free of contamination. Many of them split up from the main tribe, searching for other sacred bodies of water. Those that found theirs founded their own tribes, spreading their kind all across the country, especially the Visayas, which were surrounded and separated by different bodies of water. Unfortunately, their existence had a fatal flaw. They were unable to have women among their race, unable to increase their number. This was only addressed by taking in mortal women to be their wives. Unfortunately, mortal women of the past would not want to be brides of creatures they deemed as inhuman. Even with their beautiful appearance, only a few of them succeeded in winning over the hearts of their partners. Because of this, they were unable to increase their numbers to protect the sacred places they guarded. Being inhuman creatures, they were chased away by humans. Worse, they were killed. Many branching tribes perished because of this. The goddess that created them felt pity. However, while she was able to create their tribe, she had no ability to alter their current state. That was why she asked for the help of another god. That nameless god gave the beautiful tribe the ability to charm humans in order to continue their race. And that was when another problem was found. As for how nature went, creatures with long lives tend to have a hard time increasing their numbers. Their fertility was low and it was up to chance whether they would have children. Some of these beautiful tribes were already at the edge. Their numbers were dwindling and were barely increasing. And because of that, many of their tribes began to abuse the ability that was taught to them. They stopped charming mortal females because of love. Instead, they charmed them to continue their race. The deranged race began to hoard mortal females, taking more than one female as their wives. Some even began to kill each other due to the fact of targeting another member's females. It created distraught between them and the humans. The latter began to wage war against the creatures that took their women. But more than everything else, the goddess that created them was enraged by their unscrupulous act. Thus, after the war was quelled, the race was cursed. It did not matter whether who was the culprit or the innocent. The entirety of their race was cursed to prevent the event from happening once more. That curse was the root of the restrictions that the tribe currently had. And from there, they could only continue the life that the goddess that created them paved for them. The curse kept their number from increasing too much or even from perishing completely. That continued until the present. That was how the present Tamawas came to be. The Tamawas had very low fertility. It was rare for anyone to actually have siblings. Those that managed to have more than one child were deemed lucky. One of those lucky people was the previous king of the main tribe in Kawasan. A mortal woman's fertility was short compared to the lives of the Tamawa. Even so, despite the large gap between their births, 2 princes were born in that king's era. Unfortunately, that king was quite old already. His life would last only for the next 100 years when he had his second son. Still, the queen, who was immortal, still died earlier than the king. It was something that could not be helped due to the difference in races. The 2 princes had a gap of 20 years in age. By the time the second child was born, the first was already an adult. During childhood, a Tamawa's growth was similar to humans. They would only start aging slower once they reached adulthood. Everyone valued the first prince. He was deemed to be the next king as the older one. Unexpectedly, the valued heir to the throne grew eccentrically. His thoughts were outside the norm of their tribe. His thoughts were far-fetched, and there was a lot in the tribe that he disagreed on. Nonetheless, he was the best warrior at the time. It was what mattered the most to their race. A splendid warrior would become a splendid king, as they said. It was until the first prince fell in love with a woman. She was pretty, kind, and gentle. They met by accident when the woman was lost in the woods of Kawasan. She saw the first prince in his undisguised form. Normally, a person would feel afraid seeing a beautiful but inhuman being. However, it was not the case for that woman. She asked Pephile about directions without any shred of fear. The fascinated first prince decided to guide the woman out of the woods. She safely got out of the forest, thanking the first prince with a beautiful smile. From then on, the two met with each other from time to time for the span of 2 months. It all happened with the first prince not telling anyone. Unfortunately, the kind woman was just a tourist in this place that came with her parents and siblings. They came to visit some relatives and would leave afterward. The first prince was distraught. He definitely fell in love with that woman. He could have charmed her and abducted her. But the eccentric prince did not want to follow the steps of his tribe. He did not want for his beloved to become like a puppet. Albeit able of thinking independently, their priority was always their husband. They had no freedom at all. It was not true love at all. The first prince wanted to follow her. However, he was the first prince, the heir to the throne. There was no way that the others would let him leave and would force him to charm the woman instead. After all, he already fell in love. If he did not get the heart of the woman, he would die sooner or later. Even so, he could not force her to come with him. He decided to confess on the last day that they were together. Unfortunately, it was too sudden. The woman was unable to sort her feeling yet. It was regretful. If the first prince had done this sooner, there might have been a chance to make her stay. Their last meeting ended with the woman running away. It was a bad ending. However, the first prince was unable to let go. He remembered where the woman's hometown was. Since he would die soon anyway, he decided to take the gamble. Throwing away the title of the first prince, he left the tribe in search of the woman he loved. There, the first prince disappeared without a trace. It caused the whole tribe to turn upside down. Worst, the king was already in his last years. Soon, they would need another king to lead them. The search for the missing prince began. Unfortunately, no one was able to find him. Even so, the old king decided to wait for the return of the first prince. That, however, gave a bad taste in the mouth of the second prince. After all, it was always the first prince and not the second. The second prince was already sick of it. Since the first prince left, he should have the throne instead. However, no one thought of such a thing. Soon, the king died, leaving an empty throne. Without anyone to take over, the oldest Tamawo took the lead temporarily. They were still waiting for the first prince. Unfortunately, the second prince was having none of it any longer. Allying himself with the enemies of the previous king, he took the throne by force. Day 153 to 8:39 p.m. Village of Exiles, Barangay Mardragelos, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. I better go now. I have to prepare things on my side. Pephile stood up from his seat after drinking the rest of the tea. Then, let me lead you out, Aril said, also standing from his seat. There's no need to. I'm not the child you always have to usher in the past. Pephile replied as he walked towards the door. Aril watched Pephile's back. About 100 years ago, Pephile was just a child that called him uncle. Now, there was no trace of that child anymore. What was left was a pitiful wanderer forced to be alone. Is there anything we can do to help? Aril asked. Pephile stopped and turned his head above his right shoulder to look at the old Tamawo. There is one thing you can do, Pephile replied. Your son and all those still loyal to my father. Make them leave the tribe before the day after tomorrow. If they didn't leave, I would not be able to ensure their safety. With those words, Pephile walked out of the door. Aril wanted to ask why. However, even if he was loyal to the previous king and Pephile, it would be suspicious if he pressed for details. Instead, he fell silent and took Pephile's advice to heart. The old Tamawo walked towards the door to take a peek at the leaving Pephile. Unexpectedly, even though it was just a few seconds, Pephile was already gone. It looked like he had gotten stronger after these years, Aril murmured with a smile. He was happy to see the growth of their king. I should hurry and send a message to my son. A day is barely enough for them to leave the tribe. Aril then rushed towards the window behind his house. The window was opened wide with a potted plant. The plant was strange as it was not something that could be seen by humans. Nonetheless, its 12 inches tall stem bore a huge bud at its end. Tanaya, I need you to wake up. Aril spoke to the flower. No, not to the flower but the creature residing inside it. The voice of the old Tamawo made the bud shake as it slowly bloomed into a beautiful red flower. Inside the flower, a little girl sat in a fetal position, stretched her arms up, and yawned. The cute little girl with blonde hair then shook her glowing dragonfly wings and opened her golden-colored eyes. It was a lambana. a spirit race said to have been born from the tears of the Philippine goddess of the moon, Bulan. "What is it, Aril? I'm still sleepy," the Lambana, Tanaya, complained to the old Tamawo. "I'm sorry, but this is urgent," Aril replied. "I need you to send a message to my son as soon as possible." "Urgent?" Tanaya asked as she stood on the flower. "How urgent is it?" "Their lives might be at stake," Aril truthfully answered. "We can't delay this message." Hearing the old Tamawo's answer, Tanaya shook herself awake. She listened carefully to Aril's message and flew out of the window in a hurry. "I wish that Pephile would succeed," Aril voiced out as he saw Tanaya leave. "Even if he did not accept being our next king, it was better than living under the rule of his brother." *******. The second prince allied himself with the enemies of the previous king. They were the Tamawas who were exiled after committing crimes and blaspheming their culture and tradition. They were the previous ones thrown in the village of exiles. The village of exiles was a village built by those who were exiled by the tribe. To be exiled from the tribe was something grave for the members, as it was basically cutting off their blood and not for the generations they served the tribe. As exiles, they were outcasted not only by the members of the tribe but also by the other races living nearby. It made it hard for them to live without the support of the tribe. Experiencing the hardships living as an exile made the hearts of the criminals curse the previous king. The only way for an exile to return to the tribe was to receive the king's forgiveness. Thus, they took the opportunity to aid the second prince and gain the freedom they wanted. And in the end, a bloody coup ensued led by the second prince and the exiles. It all started in a sneak attack in their ancestral land, killing all those unprepared warriors along the way. The second prince succeeded in taking over the throne in one night. Those exiles that aided him had their status restored, while those who were loyal to the previous king were exiled in return. However, even though the coup succeeded, the second prince, the new king, was unsatisfied. In the end, he never felt the accomplishment of surpassing his eccentric brother. He just took over an empty throne, nothing else. And the worst thing, the treasure of their tribe that was the symbol of the king, did not respond to the new king's call. Frustrated, the new king thought that it might have something to do with his brother. Thus, the new king gave his order. It was to find his missing older brother. The Tamawas might not have any ability to locate a person. However, there were other races in existence that might be able to do so. In the end, they found a witch. The witch was not able to locate the exact location of the missing prince. However, she managed to give the general location. And there, the new king himself led the search. They reached Infanta, a place very far from their homeland. However, they were not able to find a trace of the missing prince. One day, however, while looking for the traces of the missing prince, the new king saw a mother and a child buying food in a seaside market. The new king was stunned at the beauty of the mother. Without a doubt, the new king fell in love with the mortal woman. He stalked the mother and child to their home and infiltrated the home during the night. There was no hesitation on the new king's mind as he tried to mark the woman and use his charm magic. Unexpectedly, the king's mark and charm magic did not work and bounced off. Instead, he smelled a familiar scent from the mother. It was the scent, the marking of his missing brother. The new king was enraged. Once again, his brother was ahead of him. Nonetheless, the new king was not one to give up, especially with his life at stake. With his brother not around, the new king decided to wait and abduct his wife. It was not something that happened immediately. With a curse that Tamawas used to slowly weaken a human, the new king brought the woman to the brink of death. And soon, in human perception, the woman died, leaving the orphaned child. The woman was buried without anyone knowing what actually happened to her. But in truth, she was there as she watched her fake body buried, unable to escape from the new king of Tamawas and his warriors. Finally, the first prince returned, only to see his wife getting abducted by his brother. It led to a battle. Of course, not that duel needed to be fought by the two Tamawas that fell in love with the same woman. The first prince was at a disadvantage. Once he lost all this energy fighting the warriors, the new king would initiate the duel. It was one of the loopholes in their curse. There was no rule that both parties should be in the best state, nor they could disagree. After all, the rules were not made by them. Being called a duel was just sugarcoating the whole process. In fact, rather than a duel, it was more of a fight to their deaths. The method did not matter as long as one of the two candidates defeated their killed or made their opponent submit. In that case, the first prince would lose, not only his life but the love of his wife. The wife of the first prince also knew what was going on. She accepted the first prince's love knowing what he was. Thus, the first prince did not hesitate to tell stories about himself and his race. And the woman was a smart person. Knowing that she would be fine as long as her husband was not defeated by the new king, she decided on something. The woman took advantage of the situation. Since the warriors were not there to protect their king and were surrounding her husband instead, she tackled the new king down. It caused the warriors to become distracted. However, it was not enough for her and the first prince to escape together. Thus, the woman roared towards the first prince. She was willing to wait for him. He should escape for now. Heavy-hearted, the first prince had no choice but to follow his wife's bidding. Once he was caught and defeated in that situation, everything would be lost. His wife was one thing, but they also had a young child that lost his mother and did not know who his father was. It was already lucky that the new king did not care for the child and left the kid alone. But if he was defeated here, not only his wife would fall into the hands of his brother, but the future of the orphaned child would also become bleak. There was no other choice. Before the warriors managed to recover from the distraction, the first prince escaped. A chase happened, but the first prince managed to hide eventually. Nonetheless, the new king was not disheartened. His brother would return for sure to retrieve his wife. It was unfortunate that he would not be able to do anything with her. In the least, he would not die since both candidates for her partner were still alive and had not given up. And as the new king thought, the first prince did return. The first prince tried to sneak into their territory and save his wife. Unfortunately, many things had changed since the new king sat on the throne. As such, the unexpected things led to the first prince almost get caught. With the help of the remaining people loyal to the previous king, the first prince managed to escape once more. Unfortunately, it caused the lives of those that helped him. Since then, the first prince had gone missing once more. The first prince returned to his son, waiting for a chance to take back what was his. Unfortunately, he could not face his son until he got his wife back. There was no way that he would tell that his mother was taken away because of his weakness. He could only take care of the child in the shadows, putting food in the kitchen and protecting him from dangers. A decade has passed by since then. And now, the first prince finally found a chance. It might cost him his loyalty, but it was better than waiting longer. Besides, being under a potential god recognized by the higher beings was not bad at all. Even if the one he had to serve might become the god of chaos in the future. Pephile left the village of exiles. Standing under the tree that overlooked the valley where their tribe resided, Pephile took out an item from his leather bag. It was a crystal with a glowing orb inside. I'm hesitating to use this before, but it's not the time to hesitate any longer. I'll be willing to sell my soul to the devil if it would give me a higher chance to save her. Save Celine. Pephile then left to a certain place. It was a cave that only he knew since he was a child. Here, there was no one to disturb him until he gained the new power bestowed unto him. Unknown to Pephile, however, his acceptance of weakness caused a commotion in the tribe. It was because the mark of the king that never accepted the new king suddenly began to resonate. Day 153 to 10:01 p.m. Tamawo Ancestral Tribe, Hidden Realm, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. In the secluded canyon where the Matutinao River flowed towards the Kawasan Falls, it was where the hidden realm of Tamawas could be found. With the bare eyes of mortals, the place was nothing but a beautiful place. It was a bit creepy, though, due to some eerie presence in the surroundings. That eerie presence was justified, however. This place was a nest, not only to the Tamawas but also to other spirits and elementals of nature. If one was capable of seeing the canyon's true appearance, it was far beautiful than what a mortal eye could see. Large trees that dangled over the river, filled with old vines and flowers. Almost every tree was connected together with vines that formed bridges over the river. Many houses built from the trunks, branches, and roots of the trees could be seen. Most of them were built up the trunks like huge treehouses, having either thick vines or vine ladders to climb up and down. At the center of the hidden realm, there was a cluster of trees that grew interwoven together. It formed a large structure incomparable to the houses around it. It was the castle of the tribe. Although it might only be within the size of a small mansion, it was still the abode of the king of Tamawas. At this moment, the current king of Tamawas, Artile, was inside the most important hall in the castle. It was where the mark of the king of Tamawas was displayed. Artile was staring at the mark atop its pedestal as the ancient letter inscribed on it kept on glowing. It was as if it was pulsating, resonating towards something. Just what in the world is happening? Artile grumbled in annoyance and agitation. This damn mark had not accepted me all these years, and now, it would behave like this? The Tamawas around Artile were mostly silent. They were also confused as to why the mark was behaving like this. In all their history, it was the first time that this happened. My king, a tall Tamawo who stood behind Artile spoke. Please calm down. Being agitated would not do us any good in a situation that none of us could understand. Artile turned to the tall Tamawo for a second and turned away without a care for his words. Nonetheless, the tall Tamawo just smiled at the king's uncaring gesture. This tall Tamawo was named Turvil, Artile's current advisor and one of the people that backed the current king when he forcefully took the throne. He was also one of the people that hated the previous king the most and the same person that urged the current king to rebel towards the elder Tamawo that led the tribe during the absence of a king. Artile racked his brains. He wondered if he could find even a clue about what was happening. Unfortunately, there was no way of knowing. Not the king nor his people inside the castle knew about what was going on with the mark of the king. Wait, my king. Turvil suddenly had a flash of thought. There might be someone who might know about this. Who? Artile turned to Turvil with a frown. Quick, tell me. The elder that led the tribe before you, my king. Turvil smiled. The oldest Tamawo alive, Eril. Then, don't waste time. Summon him here, Artile ordered aggressively. Nonetheless, Turvil still smiled as he left the hall despite the aggressive behavior of the king. Asterisk asterisk. That kid is still immature, isn't he? Impatient and stupid. Turvil was, outside, waiting for the warriors under him when a gruff voice entered his ear. Without looking in the direction where the voice came from, Turvil replied. You already said it. He's still a kid. He'll grow up as time goes. Besides, an immature kid is easier to manipulate. Kekeke. That eerie laughter was the last thing Turvil heard before the voice vanished. Father, we've arrived. A young Tamawo arrived and stood in front of Turvil. From his attire, this Tamawo was definitely a warrior. Aside from being a warrior, he was Turvil's son. Let's head out, Turvil said to his son and the warriors in front of him. We need to bring Eril back as soon as possible. Asterisk 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 day 153 to 11:21 p.m. Madrigelos National High School, Barangay Madrigelos, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. Everyone was now asleep on their beds. Well, except Mark, of course. He moved the teacher's table pushed to the side of the classroom to a better location close to the sleeping May and the little girls. And right now, he was drawing on a sheet of bond paper with Ignis and Crimson watching at his side. The drawing was not some anime character or a weapon design, however. It was the map of the town occupied by the Tamawas. Using the memory he had when he flew over the town on Schaffler's back, he decided to draw a map to use later on. On the side of the paper, there was also a phone. It was a phone that was strapped on Ignis to record a video of the town while the sword scouted the area. The map was getting clear as Mark went on drawing. It was unfortunate, however, as the video on the phone was too dark. I should get a night vision camera if possible, Mark murmured as he locked the phone screen. Regular phones and cameras aren't that reliable in the dark. I should probably get some waterproof ones too. The US military should have some of those, the voice of Ignis echoed inside Mark's head. I can't say for sure about this country's military, though. The Philippine military does have those, Mark replied. But I don't really want theirs. The ones listed in their equipment lists are old, outdated models. I rather have those sold in rich gadget stores since those are brand new and newer models. The soldiers in this country really have it bad, don't they? Ignis said with a voice filled with contempt. Kind of, Mark agreed. There might be bad soldiers, but they aren't incompetent in general. It's just the government did not pay too much attention or enough funding to the military for them to be able to compete with other countries. Many people see funding the military more as a sign of possible dictatorship. So, it all boils down to this because of history, right, Master? Pretty much. Mark nodded to what Ignis said as he stopped drawing. It's not finished yet, isn't it? Ignis said as it floated above the unfinished map that Mark had drawn. I wasn't able to see everything while on Schaffler's back. There are angles and areas covered by trees and other buildings. Mark then turned to the phone once more. You passed by some of those areas, but the video is too dark to see. That is troublesome, Ignis replied. Even though I managed to see a lot clearer, the phone did not record them properly. At those words, Mark suddenly turned to the demon sword. You just said that you saw those areas clearly, right? Can't you just show me? Show? Ignis was confused for a second, but then, that. It seemed that Ignis forgot, but before it was a demon sword, it was a cursed sword. A being that could enter someone's consciousness. And with Ignis' help, Mark could enter his subconscious world together with it. As such, Mark grabbed Ignis, and it invaded his subconscious. As before, they were greeted by the void that was Mark's subconscious world. There, Mark floated with the childish figure of Ignis. It was until the incomplete replica of the town that Mark had drawn began to form. Ignis sighed. I really can't get used to this. For Master to be able to completely control your subconscious world, it was surreal. You don't have to get used to it. Mark glanced at Ignis. Just do your job and fill in the missing parts as much as you can. I'll allow you to do so. Aye. Ignis replied as it flew towards the incomplete parts of the map that it could remember correctly. Soon, Ignis filled in what he could. There were still incomplete areas, but it was way better than before. Mark and Ignis floated above the town. They stared at the almost perfect replica they created. Sorry, Master. I'm just a sword, so my memory capabilities are subpar. I wasn't able to fill in everything. Ignis sure was a bit disappointed. Don't worry, I'm not really expecting much. Mark shrugged. You said before that you saw it clearer, not memorized it. Ignis groaned. Could Master be a little bit softer in your feedback? I also have feelings, you know? I'm already holding back on that, Mark shrugged. Want me to say what I really thought about it? No. I guess I'll refrain. I'll accept the previous one. Ignis backed off. If Mark was already holding back, the real words he had should be way harsher. Despite what he said to Ignis, however, Mark was already pretty satisfied with the outcome. Pushing it to perfection was unnecessary. In the first place, he only needed the layout of the town. Also, the trail up to the falls if possible. Unfortunately, neither Crimson nor Ignis managed to scout the perimeter of the falls and up the Matutinao River. Apparently, Ignis felt magical wards around the area and more as they go further upstream. Those magical wards were used to monitor the area and detect intruders. Both Ignis and Crimson would not be able to scout the place without keeping themselves undetected. Those wards might be the reason they knew when people throw garbage into the waters of the falls, don't they? Mark suddenly thought. Likely. Ignis agreed. Tamawas are different from other magical beings and elementals. They can't turn themselves invisible for too long since their magical reserves are too low. They won't be able to monitor the falls constantly without getting seen by humans. Well, it doesn't really matter, Mark said. I only wanted the layout of the town so I won't accidentally kill innocent humans once we attack them. You managed to locate where the slaves stay during the night, so it's enough. I'm really surprised that accidentally killing humans would bother you, Master. Ignis commented. I don't really care too much before, Mark replied. But Freed changed a few things about how I think about humans when we fused, so it can't be helped. Besides, it's his will, and I really can't deny his wishes. Ignis fell silent. Being around Mark, he already knew about the story about the Freed and other mysteries that surrounded Mark. And this fact also gave Ignis something to feel scared about. If Mark wanted it, he could also swallow the consciousness of Ignis. It was fortunate that Mark took interest in him as a cursed sword. If not, he could have been already dead, forced to become a part of Mark's powers. What are you thinking about? Mark flicked the forehead of Ignis. Don't daze around. We still have work to do. With the map already recorded in Mark's subconscious, he and Ignis exited his subconscious world. Only to find out that his lap was pretty heavy. Mark was concentrated on recreating the map in his subconscious that he did not realize. It seemed that Abigail woke up and climbed up to his lap before falling asleep again. Now, Abigail was asleep, leaning on his chest. She was not deeply asleep, though, as she was squirming around a bit. Seriously. Mark could only let out a bitter smile. In any case, it would not hurt to take a little break. Thus, he waited until the little catgirl was already sound asleep on his lap. That was when he laid her back to her bed before he continued working for the rest of the night. Day 154 to 8:21 a.m. Madrigellos National High School, Barangay Madrigellos, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. Early in the morning, someone knocked on the door of the classroom where Mark's group stayed. It was Officer Emilio and a few soldiers. The female soldier that was assigned to Mark's group, Private Tanya Monteroso, opened the door. Opening the door, however, Officer Emilio and his soldiers were a bit surprised. Sir, Private Monteroso saluted. She might look like a dignified soldier as her salute had perfect timing and precision. Even her expression was in the best form, as expected of the role model of her graduating class. However, Officer Emilio and the soldiers behind him could not take the female soldier seriously at her current appearance. Her mouth was covered in oil, and her clothing had stains left by drops by the same kind of oil. Not to mention that her left hand was still holding onto a large bowl of instant noodles, and the other hand she used for saluting was still holding onto a spoon. Officer Emilio could ignore her breakfast, but the other soldiers could not. They could not help but stare at the bowl of instant noodles while remembering what they ate for breakfast a few minutes ago. What they had was just a bowl of salted rice porridge with fish slices and wild herbs. It was heavy and filling but was never as tasty as instant noodles. When was the last time they ate instant noodles or even any delicious food? They could not remember at all. The whiff of smell coming from inside the room did not help at all. Even though the soldiers just ate, they somehow felt hungry. Now, some of the soldiers felt a bit jealous. They should have volunteered to be the ones to attend this strange group. It was clear that what Private Monteroso was eating was from them. Ha! Officer Emilio sighed. Private, next time, you should put down what you were eating before saluting. Ah! The female soldier's face turned red in embarrassment. It passed her mind as it was a long time that she managed to eat something like this. However, she already saluted. It was too late. Officer Emilio entered the room and saw Mark's group just having their breakfast. The unity within the group sure was admirable for them to eat together in one place. Admiring this scene was not the officer's goal here, though. Are you here to give what I asked yesterday? Mark turned to the officer and asked. Here it is. Officer Emilio handed an enveloped piece of paper. Even though there was only one page of handwritten information, the officer still put it in a suitable container for appearance's sake. In any case, Mark had no comment as to how little the information was. It was hard to do a proper recon on magical creatures without suitable equipment. The risk was just too high. Furthermore, it just had what Mark lacked: the schedule followed by the Tamawas in guarding the town they occupied. It would allow Mark to minimize unnecessary deaths of innocents while raining chaos onto the enemies. "You don't really want our assistance?" Officer Emilio asked as Mark was reading the handwritten document. "I already said it before. It's not necessary. In the worst case, you guys would end up as a setback instead," Mark replied. There were no roundabouts and straight to the point. That, however, made the soldiers show negative expressions. If not for the fact that they were briefed not to cause any trouble, some of them might actually argue with Mark. The charm of their leader sure was admirable to be able to keep a leash on them. At Mark's answer, Officer Emilio did not falter. "Then, I want to ask something." "What is it?" Mark tilted his head a little and asked back. "What do you intend to do with that town occupied by the Tamawas? Will we be able to pass through afterward? If not, we would like to take advantage of your plans to force our way through while you deal with your business." Since the goal of this group of survivors was to travel north, Officer Emilio asked this question. "What I intend to do? Isn't it obvious?" Mark smirked at the question. "Kill all enemies that stood in front. If all the whole tribe of Tamawas dared to stand against us and not run away, they better prepare to become extinct." The soldiers shivered at Mark's declaration. They were all looking at him when he answered. One thing they all noticed was his eyes emanating the killing intent of a predator. Although the soldiers did not know whether Mark could actually do it, they could feel that he would for some strange reason. "Also, by the way," Mark suddenly retracted his smirk and showed a strict face at Officer Emilio, "I have serious advice for you guys." "What is it?" Officer Emilio took a deep breath and asked. "Instead of going north, you guys should prepare to leave this place today and head east. Find a flat, clear area and set camp for the next few days." "What are you talking about?" This time, Officer Emilio was definitely upset. All this time, they were persevering to travel north. Now, Mark was telling them to divert the single goal they were chasing. "I can't tell you the details." Mark shrugged. "You don't have the privilege." "What privilege?" The officer and his soldiers were taken aback in confusion. They could understand what Mark was talking about. "You all won't understand anyway and will only think we're crazy." Mark did not entertain their confused questions. "You guys don't have to follow my advice. But I'll tell you, officer. You all will probably get killed if you don't listen to me. Can't you just explain? Earlier, you're being blunt. Now, you are going around in circles, not explaining anything." One of the soldiers could not hold it anymore and stepped forwards. However, before the soldier could say anything more, Officer Emilio grabbed his shoulder. "Don't say anything else," the officer warned, making the soldier silent. "We're leaving," Officer Emilio told Mark with a sour expression. "If you need anything else, just tell Private Monteroso." And there, the officer and his soldiers left, leaving the awkward female soldier still holding onto her bowl of instant noodles. Sir." Private Monteroso suddenly spoke. "Miss May and Miss Pearl, are they also going with you to attack the town?" "They are." "Why do you ask?" Mark asked back. Won't it be dangerous? The Tamawas can charm women, after all." "I don't know, but maybe the girls too?" the private stated. To that question, Mark smiled. "The Tamawas' charm magic only affects human females capable of bearing children. Their magic won't work on children, non-humans, and those already marked by their kind. So, we'll have no problems." Mark's answer made not only the female soldier but also Pearl and Edsel confused. An hour passed. Another emergency meeting was held under Officer Emilio's call. "Officer Emilio, what is it this time?" the fisherman, Caudillo, asked, quite bewildered. His group was just about to head out to the coast when he was called for a meeting. It was not only Caudillo but everyone inside the principal's office. All of them were called by Officer Emilio for a meeting at an awkward timing, especially when they just held one yesterday. "I want all of you to announce to everyone. Prepare immediately since we will leave this place before sundown. We will be heading to the flat areas east of this place. What? Caudillo could not help but slam his hands on the desk of his chair as he abruptly stood up. Of course, it was not only the fisherman. The other people around were also shocked at Officer Emilio's sudden announcement. "What is going on with you?" Dr. Janice asked. "I know you're not someone to make abrupt decisions like this." As Dr. Janice asked, the military officer was forced to tell what Mark said just an hour ago. "Just because of what that guy said, you are telling us to leave this place?" Denver surely was unable to stand the nonsense. He didn't even give a proper explanation. "You know how dangerous it is going east. Are you trying to get us all killed?" Denver is right. Caudillo agreed at the handsome man this time. "If that Mark did not want to let us go with the initial idea, we can just wait here until they finish. We have to reason to risk traveling across forests and mountains and leave the safety of this place." "Are you going to insist, Officer Emilio?" Dr. Janice asked the officer that fell silent. "If you insist on leaving, this group we had might end up splitting apart." Officer Emilio panned his eyes to everyone inside the room. They were all waiting for his answer. He could only close his eyes as this was a kind of problematic decision on his part. However, he had been to a lot of battles as a soldier. He had a lot of close calls in his life. It was when he learned something important. It was to trust his survival instincts. It was natural instincts not affected by confusion and ill thoughts. Officer Emilio was too focused on traveling north that his instincts somewhat dulled. However, when Mark gave his advice, that survival instinct kicked in. He knew that even though Mark was unable to give any specific explanation, he was not lying or joking when he said those words. The officer knew that even though many of the survivors looked up to him, he would not be able to convince everyone this time around. It was an unreasonable decision in the eyes of many, after all. "However, I insist," Officer Emilio announced. "Tell everyone to prepare to leave. If won't force anyone, but I will leave with those who want to follow me." Everyone was surprised by his decision. He stuck to it. It was unknown whether it was guts or he was just being a fool. But then, "All right, then." Dr. Janice smiled. "Count me in." The doctor's words gave another round of surprise. "Doctor, you're not serious, aren't you?" Caudillo asked Dr. Janice. "Then, I'll ask you all something." Dr. Janice stood up and pointed at Officer Emilio. Had any of his decisions failed us so far? That question made everyone contemplate. Since the fall of their settlement, Officer Emilio took charge of this group. And so far, none of his decisions were wrong. It was unsettling that they could not refute the words of the doctor at all. It just meant that while it seemed unreasonable, there might be a high chance that this was one of the times that Officer Emilio's decision would be the right thing to follow. However, not everyone would just buy that. In any case, as long as the majority agreed, the others would likely follow. "Then, let's vote immediately. We can't really drag it along if we need to leave by sunset. Who's in favor of leaving?" Dr. Janice suggested as she raised her hand to vote. And because of the words of Dr. Janice, the majority was convinced to follow Officer Emilio's decision. Officer Emilio could not help but look at the doctor, only to receive a wink from her. Surely, this eccentric doctor was aiming for this. In any case, it was decided that they would leave. It was even if they had to travel during the night. Soon, the whole school became busy. The sudden announcement for departure was, of course, questioned by many of the survivors. However, as what the government was good at, twisting some of the details and removing some while keeping most of the truth convinced the people. It was not lying to the people, just not telling everything. Mark watched the rushing people around the school through the window of the classroom. On his hand was the radio. He was relaying the plans to Barak's group that had just reunited with Pefile. Day 154 to 10:11 a.m. Madrigellos National High School, Barangay Madrigellos, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. "Everyone is so busy," Private Monteroso murmured as she peeked out the window. She could not help but glance at Mark, who was the reason for all of this. At the same time, she seemed to have something to say but was hesitating. Of course, it did not escape Mark's empathic detection. Want to ask something? Mark turned to the female soldier while he was arranging some items into his bag. The female soldier hesitated. You're a soldier. What are you hesitating for? Mark raised an eyebrow. Private Monterosso could only complain inside. She would not hesitate if not for the fact that it was Mark's group that she was facing. Especially earlier. The way that Mark said that they would kill anything blocking their path was rather frightening, even for a soldier like her. It was not fear on a physical level but a mental level. Taking a deep breath, the female soldier finally spoke. I want to be excused from this post. Everyone is already preparing to leave. I need to help my younger sister prepare too. She's just a child. Mark then shrugged. This soldier was unable to leave her post because Officer Emilio put grave importance on their group. Just go. As you can see, we don't need any babysitting. If anyone asked why you're not here, just tell them that I chased you away. Is that okay? Private Monterosso was surprised. If she did say that to people, it would not be surprising if they saw Mark as a bad person. Just go already. Or do you want to stay here all day? Mark glared at the soldier, making her flinch, and as if she was really chased out, Private Monterosso came out of the room half running. Finally, she's out. Mark smirked as he watched the soldier run away. He then closed the door of the room, only leaving the higher windows of the classroom to light up the room. Master, you're only finding a way to chase her away, right? Emihan flew and landed on Mark's head. It's good that she's gone. She kept on staring at me. It's uncomfortable. Don't worry. She doesn't have any ill intention. Mark tapped Amihan's head. She's just someone similar to May and me, in one aspect. Similar? Amihan asked as she looked at May, who was helping the girls wipe their bodies. There was no way for them to take a bath at this time, after all. On the other hand, May understood what Mark said and nodded at Amihan's glance. She's also a person without childhood, May stated, on which Mark nodded in agreement. It was very likely that Private Monterosso was also the eldest child in their family, causing her childhood to be cut short because of expectations put on her shoulders. And if Private Monterosso came from a family of soldiers, it would have been worse. Fathers who were either soldiers or policemen were known for their unreasonable strictness to their children. Of course, it was not every one of them. However, this circumstance was quite common. It was very obvious to the soldier's childish fascination with Emihan and her magic. She even had some knowledge about Tamawas since she asked that question earlier. It was likely that she was a lover of fairy tales but was reprimanded because of it in her childhood. Anyway, there's no eyes watching us now. I'll go check on those four, Mark said as he stood up, making Emihan fly away from his head. I already wrote the plans on this paper. Everyone should read it later. Mark then placed the paper beside May. Take care, May said to Mark, as she snuck a kiss on his cheek as he bent down. Mark froze a bit as it was unexpected. He could not help but glance at May. May's face was a bit red as she turned away in embarrassment. It seemed that she did it without thinking since Mark's face was close to hers. Mark shook his head as he patted her head. I'll be quick. I just need to tell them what we are going to do tonight. Papa, bye-bye, Miracle said while being wiped by her mama. Abigail and Iola then followed suit before Amika snuck a request. Uncle, bring some souvenirs back. Geez. I'm just going to a nearby forest. What do you expect me to bring back? All right, I'm going. Mark complained before he turned into a surge of black mist that flew through the window behind the room. Then, he went out through the backside of the school. Leaving the school, Mark appeared not too far from the walls. The distance of his shadow mist movement was limited, after all. He needed to appear and disappear at fixed intervals. Soon, he reached an abandoned house southwest of the school. It was where Barak, the two soldiers, and Pephile were left to hide. What Mark saw when he arrived, however, was a tree by the side of the road, waving its branches unnaturally. And then, bam! The thickest branch suddenly shot towards Mark at fast speeds. It was as if a spear was thrown towards him at full force. Furthermore, the target was his face. Mark tilted his head to his left, and the branch passed an inch away from his ear. But then, the branch whipped towards his face after it failed its first attack. It would be hard to avoid it as the movements of the branch were too fast. The only thing Mark could do was kick the ground into a cartwheel to his left, making the branch miss due to its speed. "I know I'm ugly, but do you really have to target my face?" Mark complained to the tree in front of him. To Mark's complaint, however, the tree replied, "The head is a smaller target and is better for practice." The voice was no other than Pephile. The branch that attacked Mark then started to wilt as Pephile showed himself, coming out of the tree. At the same time, many branches of the tree began to wither, leaving the original appearance of the tree behind. "If you want to practice, find other things." Mark frowned at Pephile. "How does it feel becoming a mutator?" "Strange," Pephile replied frankly. "It's as if I had more limbs to control, which should be strange, yet it felt natural." "Where did you get this anyway?" Pephile added, wondering where the ability within the crystal he received came from. "It's from one of the criminals in that Death Valley settlement," Mark replied. "It's one of the strangest abilities I saw there." That was right. It was a strange ability. It was an ability similar yet different from Emika and her younger brother, Mikio's abilities. Yes, it was a plant-based ability. To be exact, the ability to turn a plant into an extension of the user's ability by fusing a part of his body into it. Mark saw it being used against the failed mutator whale at that time. The criminal touched a tree, and his hand began to change, similar to that tree's appearance. Then, the tree's branches started to move, attacking the whale. When Mark saw that, he immediately beheaded the criminal, taking his head away while the tree he used returned to its original appearance. It was the perfect mutator ability for Pephile. He had the ability to phase into trees either for observation or transport. Not all Tamawas had this ability. It was not unique to him as this ability seemed to be existent in their family since the past. Not everyone in their family had it though and was considered something rare. In fact, it was one of the reasons why many Tamawas insisted on making Pephile the king despite his absence. With this mutator ability, Pephile could enter a tree and lay ambush to enemies. No one would even know what actually hit them. Mark and Pephile were conversing outside when the other Padua and Geronimo noticed Mark. "Boss." Padua greeted with a wave of his hand. "Is everything I made you two do already finished?" Mark asked as the two soldiers approached. "We already checked everything, boss," Geronimo replied. "We checked and configured the explosives, loaded the non-disposable rocket launchers, and also loaded all the vacant gun magazines." "Yeah, we finished everything for the whole night," Padua added. "We deserve some sleep." "Hey." Geronimo immediately elbowed his friend. Mark was not offended at Padua's attitude at all. In fact, it was way better than having people under his wing being afraid of him. "Then, you two should rest later after I brief everything. We will be moving tonight since we don't have much time." Hearing that, the two soldiers could not help but look at the sky. After all, they knew the reason for the limited time they had. They just wished that they could tell other people about this. However, not only were they not allowed to tell other people, even if they would likely turn into laughingstock if they did. "Is Barak tending to his pet?" Mark asked. He could detect Barak a bit away from the house and was in the nearby forest. He said that he saw a magical creature, so he's trying to see if he could tame it. Geronimo replied. "What kind of creature?" Mark asked, interested. "We don't know," Padua answered. "We didn't really see it and Barak did not describe it either." "Should we call him?" Geronimo asked. "No need," Mark replied. "I'll go find him. Just wait inside." Pephile, without saying anything, returned to the house. The two soldiers followed after the silent guy. Mark then made his way towards Barak's direction and saw him standing outside the forest. As Mark did not hide his presence at all, he was immediately found by Barak. "Boss." Barak greeted but with a whispering voice. "The two said that you found something you wanted to tame." Mark stated immediately. Yes, there is, Barak replied. But there's a disguising barrier in this forest. What it looked like is different from what we can see. I'm currently trying to figure out how to enter. A barrier, huh? Mark murmured as he covered his right index finger with miasma. Then, he poked forward. Sizz! Suddenly, a sizzling sound was heard as if something was melting. Actually, there was. It was the disguising barrier. A hole was made unto it as Mark poked it with miasma. Having a hole on its surface, the barrier became unstable. And then, crack! Like a mirror cracking, the barrier collapsed, revealing a sight that a normal human would not normally see. This. Barak could only scratch his head at the sudden situation. Furthermore, the creatures he saw were laid bare into their eyes. Unexpectedly, there were 3. The creatures were also shocked beyond measure. They were all laughing at the 2 men outside the barrier and also did not expect that it would collapse. Now, it was a staring contest of awkwardness. GYA. The creatures screamed as if they were women accidentally seen by a man while bathing. They were not naked at all though. Lambanas, huh? Mark murmured, seeing the little childish-looking girls with dragonfly wings and glowing bodies. They were all sitting on the petals of large flowers before they all flew and tried to fly away. But then, the 3 escaping Lambanas froze as Mark spoke using a broken spirit language. You 3 don't want your flowers anymore? The 3 shivered in fear. While the past Lambanas were created by gods, the current ones were born in nature, especially inside these magical flowers. It was not wrong to say that these flowers were not only their homes but also their parents. And Mark just threatened them with those flowers, not allowing any attempt to escape. After all, while the Lambanas could flee, there was no way that a plant would be able to run away. Mark then turned to Barak. There they are. I'll leave them to you. Just hurry up since I'll brief you guys on what we will be doing tonight. Mark then left the awkward Barak that was staring at his back. Barak then turned to the 3 and spoke in spirit language. Sorry, have you 3 seen a cat-like beast pass by here last night? Day 154 to 6:42 p.m., Mountain Area, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. Up the mountains northeast of Barangay Madrigelos, fierce beastly roars and loud sounds of gunshots echoed loudly. Damn! This is really a bad idea, Denver shouted as he sidestepped to evade an incoming attack. And their enemies? It was a pack of evolved feral dogs that ambushed their group as they went up the mountains in the middle of the night. Just shut your mouth and fight, Caudillo roared as he grabbed the neck of a dog much larger than him. He then jumped over the dog's neck, twisting the dog's head clockwise. The huge body of the dog fell, and the fierce fishermen rushed towards the other enemies. Following the arrangements that they decided on, the survivors of Liloan settlement left the Madrigelos National High School and made their way up the mountains before sunset. It was a tough endeavor and a huge gamble. Normally, no one would want to travel through the mountains during the night ever since the apocalypse started. It was the time when more evolved animals hunt food, and for humans, the surroundings were hard to see. Thus, it would be easy for humans to fall into ambushes from packs of evolved animals. However, they had to go under such a predicament at this moment. If not for them having guns and people from the military, things might have gone worse. Bam! Officer Emilio caused a loud sound as his stone-covered fist punched one of the dog's head into pulp. Push forward. Don't falter, the military officer roared, increasing everyone's morale. Damn. Denver looked at Officer Emilio. That guy's charisma as a leader is at an all-time high. That is why he is our leader, isn't it? Caudillo smiled. He was never able to show this talent of his back then, though. Yeah, I heard that one. Denver nodded. One of his superiors saw this talent of his and tried to push him down due to competition in the army, right? That's what they say. Caudillo replied. We can't really know what happened since that superior died because of the tidal wave. What we know is Officer Emilio do have this talent. Everyone was fighting fiercely to clear their way up the mountain. As their leader, Officer Emilio, was fighting in the front. None of them even tried to slack. But all of a sudden, boom! A loud explosion overshadowed the sounds of roars and gunshots. It was too loud that the feral dogs were startled frozen. The feral then became prey to the bullets as an unmoving target was easier to hit. Still, after the last of the dogs fell dead, the people did not feel relieved. A lot of them were staring in one direction. It was the direction where the explosion came from. The new moon had just passed, and it was early in the evening. The crescent moon still gave out a bit of light for everyone to see the thick wall of smoke floating up to the sky. "Isn't that direction the town occupied by the Tamawas?" Dr. Janice voiced out, making everyone in the know realize what was going on. "They really did it," Denver spoke. "They really are attacking those vile creatures." "What, you didn't believe it before?" Caudillo questioned the handsome man. "Just who in the right mind would believe that kind of thing, huh?" Denver retorted. "It's all of you guys who are weird to believe that a small group like that would storm a base of enemies with several times greater number compared to their members." No one was able to retort Denver. In the first place, the only reason they were inclined to believe was because of Dr. Janice and her findings of the strength of that group. If not for her, they would be like Denver, who was still skeptical. In any case, they could only hope that those vile creatures that enslaved and ate humans were destroyed by Mark's group. ****************************** Day 154 to 6:50 p.m. Town of Matutinao, Municipality of Badian, Province of Cebu. Up the sky of the town occupied by the Tamawas, Mark stared at the scene below. Using miasma to cover his body, he was basically undetectable under the night sky. He turned towards the south, the direction of the high school that was now abandoned. They should be up the mountains, now, right? There is a slight sound of gunfire echoing in the mountains. If they were that far already, it's unlikely for them to get caught in the trouble we are going to start. Mark then turned his eyes back to the town. In a few moments, the slaves would gather inside the elementary school for dinner before they go back to their dwellings. It was the best time to strike since most of the humans in the town were gathered in one place. After dinner, they would disperse once more since their dwellings were scattered all over the place. It was a countermeasure so that the humans would have less time interacting with each other and lowers the chance of them plotting an escape. Soon, guarded by Tamawa warriors, groups of human slaves arrived at the school for their rationed dinner. Well then. Mark smirked. It's time to start everything with a huge bang. Mark then took out something huge from his ring. If anyone was to see this, they would feel their scalp feel numb in fear. What Mark took out was a cluster of dynamites stuck together with duct tape. There were even other types of explosives mixed in. These were explosives that Mark's group took from the rebels' armory. It was not that many, but this amount could definitely blow up a house or two. Yet, half of the explosives that Mark's group had were used to make this abomination of a disaster. However, Mark had no regrets about doing this. In the first place, they were not doing anything like a covert operation in this town. He needed to get as much attention as possible. Why? The more commotion he created here, the higher the chance that the tribe of Tamawas would send their warriors to this place. And thus, Mark lit up the fuse of the frightening cluster of explosives. His eyes were gleaming sinisterly as his hands let go. A few sharp-eyed Tamawas saw the large thing that was falling in the sky, specifically, its fuse that was emitting light like stars. The cluster of explosives fell on the area where most of the houses in the town were grouped. And then, boom! Flames rose up in the sky, engulfing several houses made of flammable materials. The explosion created a shockwave that was felt meters away. Tamawas guarding the place died immediately, without even knowing what was going on. As the town was now covered in trees and vines because of the Tamawas, the fire began to spread out. Not to mention that the houses that were engulfed by the explosion immediately burst into flames, spreading to nearby structures. All of a sudden, in a span of seconds, the whole town was in chaos. The human slaves were scared to the core. The explosion happened just across the river and the school where they were eating was built by that same river. Some of the debris from the explosion flew in their direction. However, something strange happened. The debris flying towards them suddenly changed directions mid-air as if they were blown away by the wind. But as if one explosion was not enough, boom, boom. More explosions happened all over the town. It was because Mark flew around in the sky, throwing grenades and sticks of dynamites at places where he could see Tamawas running away. That was when the Tamawas that witnessed the death of their tribesmen realized what was happening. "We are under attack. Sound the alarm. Sound the alarm. Quick, sound the..." Boom. One Tamawo issued orders to his tribesmen. It was clear that he had a higher position. It was his last order, however, since, after a sudden clunking sound by his feet, he was engulfed by a grenade explosion. Mark threw the last explosive he intended to throw with satisfaction. Of course, he made sure to let go of some Tamawas to inform their tribe about what was going on. And then, TTUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUU Tamawo that died ordered to sound. Now, everyone in the town knew that they were under attack. Without further ado, Mark removed the miasma that covered his body and landed on the roof of one building near the bridge of the town. Everyone could see him in that location, whether it was the Tamawas scattered everywhere or the human slaves in the school. And with their enemy showing himself, the Tamawas began to surround Mark. This, however, made him smile. So far, it was going according to plan. Day 154 to 7:21 p.m. Tamawo and Central Tribe, Hidden Realm, Municipality of Algeria, Province of Cebu. Inside the castle of the tribe of Tamawas, the current king, Artile, was walking back and forth in front of his wood-woven throne. It had been several hours since the mark of the king started resonating with something. Yet, no answer was found out about the situation. Not long, someone entered the throne room. It was the tall Tamawo and the right-hand man of the current king, Turval. "How is it? Did that old bastard give an answer about the situation?" Artile immediately asked as Turval entered. "My apologies. That Aril might be old, but he is one of the people that is toughest to crack," Turval answered, kneeling on the ground on one leg. "Tisk." Artile clicked his tongue in annoyance. "Did he even say anything that we can use as clues?" "His mouth is tied shut, my king," Turval replied. However, he seemed to be delighted after learning about what happened to the mark. And considering that old man, there might only be one possibility that could make him that happy. Those words of Turval made Artile clench his fist in anger. The tall Tamawo was definitely correct. There was only one thing that could make that old man happy, and it was Artile's older brother, Pephile. The current king's eyes almost turned red in anger. This situation was angering and humiliating. He was the king at this moment. Yet the mark that he was supposed to wield never responded to his calls. And now, was it resonating with his brother? This situation meant that the mark recognized Pephile as the new king and not him. "Where is that old man?" Artile asked. "In the dungeons, my king." Turval replied immediately. "Good. Make sure to make him suffer and regret his impertinence." "Yes, my king." With this exchange, the faith of the old man was sealed in the stone. It was way worse than being exiled, without a doubt. But then, a Tamawo warrior came running into the throne room without any regard to the people around him. "My king! My king!" The warrior repeatedly called out even though he was already standing in front of the king. It was clear that he was not in the right mind and was heavily panting in panic. "You bastard! Where is your respect? You are in front of the king." Turval pushed the warrior away. As the warrior was already tired, he immediately fell on his bottom. Nonetheless, he did not seem to feel the pain, and his eyes were focused on Artile. My king! The town we occupied is under attack." And as the warrior felt relieved after relaying the news to their king, he collapsed. It seemed that the warrior forced himself to run from the town to here as fast as he could. Now, his stamina was fully depleted. After all, The distance of their realm from the town was not a short one. What in the world is happening this time? Artile growled as he stared at the unconscious warrior and turned to Terval. Terval, gather our strongest warriors. I'm going to lead them to battle. Who or whatever is attacking our territory, I'll make them pay. Terval was silent for a bit, looking down at the unconscious warrior. He then raised his head and turned to the king. My king, let me lead the battle. It was better for you to stay here. I'm sure that whatever is happening in the town, it would reach our people. They would need you to pacify their worries. Artile fell silent at Terval's words. He could not refute it, however. All right, I'll heed your words. Artile nodded. I'll stay here. Make sure to make my words come true. Make the enemies pay with their flesh and blood. Yes, my king. Terval made a last kneel before storming out of the throne room. Day 154 to 7:42 p.m. Kawasan Falls, Municipality of Badian, Province of Cebu. The attack in the coastal town in Matutinao began more than half an hour ago, and here in the middle of the woods, engulfed by the night sky, 4 men were patiently waiting. They were atop the steep area of Kawasan Falls, overseeing the path to the south side and below. Of course, these 4 were Pefile, Barak, Geronimo, and Padua. Being the group with only men experienced in battles, they were the best people to infiltrate the home of the Tamawas. It was unfortunate that they could not just storm into the tribe like this. After all, the goal on this side of the plan was not to destroy but to save a person. If they just stormed in, making everyone aware of them, things might face a wrong turn. The Tamawas were a long-lived race. Even after almost 2 decades without contact with the tribe, many of them would recognize Pefile at one look. Although disguising could work, it was not for long. Tamawas had ways to discern individuals from the same tribe. His disguise would surely get blown after some time. When Pefile's brother recognized him, it would be a bad thing. It would be clear why Pefile was back, and his brother would use that information against him. In the worst case, Celine's life would be put in danger before they could even save her. That was why it was better to stealthily infiltrate as they entered. Once the group managed to find Celine and get her out of the dungeon, it would be fine if they started to kill everything on sight as they escaped. Of course, they would rather avoid it if possible. How long are we going to wait here? Padua whispered. Boss is already having fun there for sure. Just be patient, will you? Geronimo scolded his friend. This is why you are never dispatched for covert operations. The officers definitely noticed that you're not cut for the task. Barak and Pefile were just listening to the banter of the two, but they agreed with Geronimo's words. Padua was quite a hot-blooded individual. Being patient was likely to be the last in his vocabulary. Shish. Barak suddenly hushed the two. Some people are coming. The two immediately shut their mouths, and as Barak said, a rather large group of people were seen at the woody path on the other side of the waterfall. Men with wooden spears, pale-skinned bodies with tribal tattoos, white hair, sharp nails and teeth, and handsome-looking faces. There was no doubt that this was a group of Tamawas. Looking at the leader of the group, however, Pefile could not help but narrow his eyes. You know that guy? Barak noticed Pefile's expression and asked. An enemy of mine. Pefile answered with a grim tone. The Tamawas, in general, were just like how they were usually described. However, like Pefile, some individuals were born different from others. Unlike most people in Pefile's family, he had the highest affinity to flora, especially trees. Some Tamawas could also use trees as transportation. They could move from tree to tree as long as trees were intertwined with each other, whether it be branches or roots. However, how long they could do it consecutively was limited. Pefile, on the other hand, did not need that the trees he would use to be connected. Instead, the trees he could use to travel should be the same kind of tree. If he entered an acacia tree, he must also exit in another acacia tree. The only problem was that the distance he could travel was shorter than others if the trees were not connected. While Pefile had that kind of special ability, there were also other kinds of special people within their tribe. That tall Tamawo, Turvil, was one of those special people. Turvil was different in the sense that his existence bent the current state of the Tamawas. Turvil did not bear the curse that the angry god put unto them. And yes, Turvil could charm and mark more than one woman, even if he did not fell in love with them. It was unknown, though, whether he would die if he actually fell in love and did not succeed in taking the woman's heart for himself. That, however, was the cause why Turvil was exiled from the tribe. It was already good that he was only exiled. It would not be surprising if he was executed instead. After all, his existence itself was taboo to the current Tamawas and orders that were given to them by their creator. There was no need to mention that Turvil's personality itself was somewhat rotten. Among the people he liked to charm, his type were those who were already married and already had children. Furthermore, he would not use the method to slowly weaken the woman and feign her death. Instead, he would make the woman leave her family, breaking it to pieces. Others would have turned a blind eye to him if he actually fell in love with the woman. There were also others in the same circumstance, falling in love with a married woman. But Turvil did not. He was doing it for fun, indulging himself in pleasure, finding fun in wrecking families of humans. And when the previous king learned about his deeds, Turvil was exiled and was stripped of his powers to charm human females. In the coup that Pafil's brother did, this vile Tamawo was the mastermind, and with the current situation, it was likely that it was Turvil who charmed the women currently held in the town of Mutagen. After all, it would be impossible for the other Tamawas to do it without falling in love with those women. Hurry up! We need to get to the town as fast as we can. Turvil shouted to his men in spirit Langwange as they ran through the riverside. On the other side of the waterfall, the four men silently watched the group pass by. There's 70 of them, right? Barak murmured, counting the Tamawa warriors. They seem confident to just send that number of people to face boss. They probably didn't get the correct information, Pafil replied. The one we saw earlier to relay the news looks like out of breath and about to collapse. Remembering the young Tamawa earlier that ran from the town, the other three could only nod. The Tamawas in the town let a young Tamawa run and deliver the news. It was very likely that he was of no help in the battle. That, however, left a warrior with low stamina to ran about 2.5 kilometers of uneven terrain as fast as he could. They are gone, Pafil said as they saw the backs of the group disappear from their sight. Let's get moving. Are we fine going like this? Barak asked. I don't think that those 70 is the major force of your tribe. Likely. Pafil nodded. The last time I knew, that number should be a third. But now, there are probably more warriors in the tribe. The experienced ones, I mean. The experienced ones? Padua interjected. Then how about the rookies or something like that? Pafil turned to Padua with half-closed eyes. Don't ask something that would make you nervous. Just keep your mouth shut and follow behind me. That, however, made the two young soldiers more nervous. Just how many warriors were still present in their tribe? It was hard to say whether knowing or not knowing was more frightening. Don't worry, we will take a back door. There might be guards, but we should be able to bypass them. Pafil assured the two. The four crossed the forested riverbank. They moved as stealthily as possible, avoiding anything that could alert the enemies. Being a Tamawo himself, Pafil was able to detect the magical wards placed to detect intruders. On the other hand, Barak used his magical prowess to disable the wards that they could not avoid. After another half hour, they reached the valley in the middle of the forest. It looked nothing spectacular. In fact, it looked eerie to their eyes. It was when Pafil stood in front of a pair of oddly shaped trees. He touched one of the trees, creating some ripple in the air, which was surprisingly visible to their eyes. Pafil then moved, becoming the other three to follow him, and entered the ripple. As they entered, the scene in the valley changed entirely. The dark, eerie scene turned into a scene in a fairy tale. The forest was lush, and fireflies illuminated the place. Huts and bridges made entirely of trunks of giant trees were everywhere. There were even flowers and plants that emitted light here and there. The three remembered the Dewata Araya's sanctuary in Katandwanas. It felt very similar. Don't just stand gawking there, Barak warned the two young soldiers. We will leave you too. With those words, Padua and Geronimo held their amazement back and hurried to follow behind the Pephile and Barak. Pephile guided the group in the most difficult areas of the village to traverse. They had to pass under a large treehouse with the cliff below, jump over a bridge and cross it as fast as possible, and they even climbed tree branches like monkeys to avoid the patrols. The worst part was for them to climb down the roots of another large tree on the side of the cliff above the river. One wrong move and they would fall into the water. It was something that could not be helped. Pephile was aiming for the hidden entrance to the dungeon of the tribe. It was a hole on the wall of the cliff, far above the river. After a few minutes, they reached the hole. Suddenly, URK. Padua's nose was filled with an unpleasant smell. Don't tell me, this hole. As they all dangled on the roots of the tree, none of them could cover their noses. The smell entered their noses even when they tried their best not to breathe. It's the hole where cleaners dump the feces of prisoners, Pephile explained, seemingly ignoring the smell. Look below. As Pephile said that, the other three looked down. Their eyes grew wide, not because of the height, but the pit below them. It was the area where the river bent away from the face of the cliff. Below them was a pit dug to catch the secretions of prisoners dumped through this hole. Inside the pit, however, was not only the secretions but dozens of arm-sized worms squirming about. Make sure not to fall, Pephile remarked. If you did, the feces would be the least of your problems. The face of the two soldiers paled. They were also carrying guns and bullets in their bags, so it was quite heavy. They immediately feared that they may fall. Luckily, none of what they feared happened. They managed to reach and enter the hole Pephile was talking about. The hole was also different from what they initially thought. They thought that it was like sewage, but it was just a large window where cleaners used to manually dump buckets of feces. Aside from the smell coming from below, the window itself was quite clean. Pephile and the group entered. They silently searched the place. The inside was a series of caves and caverns turned into prison cells. The whole place was quite empty, though. This place used to serve as a prison to humans caught desecrating the sacred waters. Nowadays, it was barely used. Each room was barred with thick tree roots, as the surface above the prison was actually the ancestral castle of the tribe. These roots came from the very same trees that made up the walls of the castle. Soon, Pephile stood in front of a certain prison cell. Grasping the root of the tree that served as the prison cell bar, Pephile stared at the woman lying on the bed. She was not asleep, but by what it looked like, she was too ill to notice that there was someone standing in front of her prison cell. Celine. Pephile whispered. But with the whole prison being silent, Pephile's voice echoed into the prison cell and into the woman's ear. The woman froze a bit, hearing Pephile's voice. Her droopy eyes opened wide, and she slowly turned her towards the direction where the voice came from. Seeing the man standing before her prison cell, the woman, no, Celine, could not help but let her eyes drop some tears on her bed. Nonetheless, she smiled. You idiot. Why did you take so long? Celine whispered back with her dry, sickly lips.